Hi everyone, my name is Sam Buckingham. Thank you so much for joining me. Now, I read some genuinely awesome books last year, and I've worked really hard to whittle down to a list of the 5 most compelling tales. And you know what? I think I've got a really good list. If you only read 5 books this year, I think this list will give you a very balanced perspective with some different genres and some things that will really leave you thinking. In the year 2023, when I last did my wrap up of the year, I'd read over 100 books. This year, I've probably read about half that many. Now, there's a few reasons for that. One, I read a few more non-fiction books, and that's always a little bit slower for me to get through. We're going to be talking fiction today. I also read some big heavy books this year that took a while longer to get through, but also it was probably my year of DNF, did not finish, and that is always really frustrating for me when I start a book and I don't make it through to the end because something just doesn't grip me. Now, don't find yourself in that position. Choose some really solid books that are going to keep you interested, and you'll find your reading is continuous. To help you do that, this list will provide you with 5 incredible books that will help keep those pages turning and stop any books making it to the did not finish list. So I'm going to kick off with my first book, and this is actually the only book I've got the physical copy of because of my tendency to use Kindle or Audible. This book is James by Percival Everett. Now, I read this book because, similar to the year before, I was trying to read all the books on the Booker Prize long list. This year I didn't actually make it through the entire list, but I read the vast majority, and this was one title that really stood out for me. Now, this is an alternate take on Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn, but rather than putting Huckleberry Finn front and centre, Percival Everett looks towards Jim, the enslaved man who accompanies Huckleberry Finn on his journey, making him the protagonist, and in doing so, making a really engaging, compelling read. I actually read this entire book the day I started it. I was away on holiday, I was reading it by the pool. Within a few hours, I'd read it front to back, and it made a lasting impact on me, and I knew it would make this list when I came to put it together. It's been about 20 years since I read Huckleberry Finn, so I was able to look at the story with kind of fresh eyes, but with a rough idea where it was going. And here, Everett does an awesome job of taking a character that is originally lacking depth and bringing a real substantive story to it. Now, Jim, who in this book goes by his full name James, goes from being a secondary character to a fully realised protagonist. Jim uses a really interesting slave vernacular. He kind of dumbs down the way he speaks when he's around white people, but he is actually a very intelligent man, quite well read, and when he's alone, his language is much more verbose and the way that you would expect somebody to speak nowadays. This does a really good job of highlighting the performative aspects of racial identity. Now, as this loosely follows the original narrative of Huckleberry Finn, it's got that kind of picaresque narrative where it jumps between these kind of key major events that we know from the story. I do enjoy that kind of tale. I was tempted to consider this for the Book of the Year award. I actually thought it could be hard to give an author Book of the Year when their story wasn't actually written by them, but they had just put a really interesting spin on it. But I think this absolutely deserves all the awards it has won, and it has won many. Taking home both the Kirkus Award for Fiction and the National Book Award, and also within a very strong shout of winning the Booker Prize Award. I think this is an awesome book that pays homage to a story that we know, but in a really interesting and unique way. The characters have real depth, there is a sense of humour to this book, and at points it does make you smile, but it's also very harrowing, touches on some really tough times, and does it in a really sensitive way, but a really powerful way that will leave you thinking about the book long after you've read it. It's a novel that I'll be talking about for some time, and if you haven't checked it out yet, then definitely pick up James by Percival Everett. So that brings me to my second title this year, and here we are taking a real divergence from the themes of the last book. I want to tell you about A Short Stay in Hell by Stephen L. Peck. This is an awesome book. It's only just over 100 pages. You will fly through it, but it will leave you thinking for ages. This book tells the story of Zered, a kind and caring Mormon man who lived a good life with his family and then died. And of course, he finds himself waking up in hell. Because Mormon isn't the true religion is Zoroastrian. And hell in this universe isn't the hell that we've heard about in the past. It's not fire and brimstone. Instead, you are sent down quite a bureaucratic journey to find out where you're going to end up. The demon judge that decides your fate will apply the hell that they think is most relevant to you. In this story, Zered was a keen reader, and he finds himself waking up in a horrific reimagining of the Library of Babel. He is given one mission. He must search out through this enormous library the book that holds the story of his life. To do so, he must open and read many of the books that litter the halls of this library. But it's not quite that simple. The library is seemingly endless. There are corridors upon corridors with shelves upon shelves with this endless list of books. It's pretty much every book that could have ever been written using any assortment of letters in any order possible, making the majority of them completely unintelligible and a really tough time trying to read through them. He's not alone. There are many other people who've been subjected to the same hell, and he finds himself surrounded by them, many of them seemingly good people through which he builds some strong relationships. Now, hell isn't all horrible. There's some nice little wins for him along the way, but here he really has to come to grips with the mission ahead of him. But that reality might not mean an infinity in hell, but it might mean what feels close to an infinity in hell. It could take many billions of years for him to find the book he needs to find. The book has the name A Short Stay in Hell because near infinity is a very short time compared to actual infinity. Along the way, Zered makes some really impactful relationships, which he builds some real strong depth of connection with the people around him because he's got such a long time to do so. He might fall in love and spend centuries with a new partner, but of course those relationships will eventually crumble under the relentless pressure of eternity. What makes this novella stand out for me is the existential dread. It's not that kind of classic horror book filled with scares and violence, but it really gets under your skin with that idea of endless futility. The interactions Zered has with those around him are deeply tragic and will leave you thinking about the connections you have in your own life long after you finish reading this book. But despite its grim tone, it isn't without humour. I can actually see Rick and Morty doing an awesome version of this story. I think they'd handle it really well. Or something like Black Mirror could do a really interesting take on that idea of eternity. It is short in length but enormous in scope. Would I recommend it? Absolutely, but only if you're really up for jumping into some deep existential dread. So that brings me to my third book, for which I've chosen The Family Upstairs by Lisa Jewell. Now, I actually considered putting two books by Lisa Jewell on this list. The second was None of This Is True by Lisa Jewell, which is a really interesting story of its own, but didn't quite have the same depth as the story I'm going to talk to you about today. The Family Upstairs is a dark psychological thriller that takes us through the mystery of a mansion in London and the secrets of the family that lived within it. Our story centres around a character called Libby Jones. She just turned 25, she's living a humble life, and suddenly finds out that she's inherited a mansion in Chelsea from a family she didn't know existed. Upon receiving the house, she finds out that it was the location of a terrifying tragedy that happened years ago, where all the residents were found dead wearing these cultish black clothes and nobody really knew what happened. All that had been left behind was a small baby left alone in the crib. That baby turned out to be Libby. The cause of death was ruled a suicide pact, but the events surrounding that pact were unclear, and the remaining children that lived in that house vanished. The story unfolds through three perspectives. First, you've got Libby that we mentioned previously. Then you've got Henry Lamb, the son of the rich family who owned the house. Henry recounts how his once wealthy family fell under the influence of a charismatic and dangerous couple who kind of led them headfirst into a deep cult that sucks away all their individuality and all their possessions. And then you've got Lucy Lamb. Lucy finds herself living in France, living a troubled life, when she hears that the baby has come of age, and it's time for her to return to London and face her past. As the three perspectives converge, you get a really interesting take on cult-like control, psychological manipulation, and the desperate fight for survival. The mansion holds the key to what really happened that fateful night and to the children that disappeared. Now, I really like the way this story is written. You've got two different timelines. You've got the original family living in that mansion, and then you've got the future when Libby is trying to work out what's happened in the past. And we as the reader kind of discover what happens at the same time as Libby does. We get to read through it as an original narrative, but still kind of find things out bit by bit, and it really keeps you engaged. It's a book that leaves you asking what makes a family, biological or chosen, blood or bonds. It delves deep into the impact of trauma, and it asks some powerful questions on how seemingly normal people can fall headfirst into cult-like obsession. The ending does leave a few things unanswered, which I think might frustrate some people, but I think the closing scenes brought enough closure that I was quite happy with the way it finished. The cast of characters is genuinely eclectic. I could see them turning it into a film with a really interesting mix of actors playing the different roles. And if you're looking for an interesting story that brings something new to the table, I think you're going to find something really worthwhile in The Family Upstairs. So that brings me to the fourth of 5 books I'm going to talk to you about today, which is Goyhood by Reuven Fenton. Reuven Fenton is a writer for the New York Post, and this is his debut novel. This was actually a book that was sent to me ahead of its release so that I could read it and post a review on my channel. But life got in the way and I never actually got round to posting that. But as I looked back on the books I'd read this year, this really stuck out to me as an interesting story and something I'd like to talk about a bit more. The story centres around 2 brothers, Marty and David Belkin, who around the time of their mother's death find out that they were not actually born Jewish as they were led to believe. This has a massive impact on Marty, who's now known as Meir. Meir built his life around his Jewish heritage. He became a Jewish scholar, he married into a well-respected family, the daughter of a rabbi, and that was kind of all he thought about. So to salvage his spiritual identity and his marriage, he decides to plan a quick conversion so he will be officially Jewish. Now that's a week away. So during the week running up to that, Meir goes on a road trip with his brother carrying their mother's ashes so that he can try and find himself. It's a bit of a kind of belated coming of age for Meir. Alongside his brother, they end up accompanied by a one-eyed dog and an insightful Instagram influencer. Fenton's narrative is rich with humour and heart, though some of the plot twists might stretch believability a little bit, but I do enjoy that kind of story. I mean, I'm wearing a t-shirt for Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. I enjoy those kind of chaotic journeys and coming-of-age tales, and I think this is kind of right up my alley. The road trip serves as a backdrop for Meir's internal struggle between his faith and the authenticity of his identity, and his brother serves as a really interesting counterpart. He's kind of the opposite of Meir. Meir's very highly strung, his brother David is a real free spirit, and as they come together some really interesting things happen. It's another book with a very eclectic cast of characters, and the people they meet really do push the story down some unusual lines, but I was well up for it and I was always looking for a little more. And don't be put off by the heavy references to Judaism. I actually don't know much about Jewish culture. You know, I was brought up in the UK and I'm just not surrounded by many Jewish people. Most of what I've learned has come from film and TV, and there was lots of things mentioned in this book that I just didn't know much about. I did find myself hopping onto Google at points just to find out a little bit more on the things I was reading. I was quite surprised at the ending of this story, and I actually expected it to end kind of differently. I thought that Meir would be deciding that his brother's life was more the kind of thing he was looking for, but that really isn't how it ends up going. But maybe that's just me applying my own perspective to the story, and maybe you would think differently. Overall, Goyhood is a thought-provoking exploration of faith and identity. It's clearly written by a talented author. I do hope that he goes on to write more books, because I would be very interested to see what comes next from him. If you're looking for something a little bit more upbeat with some humour and heart, then jump straight into this book. So that brings me to the final book that I'm going to talk to you about today, and the book that I'm crowning my book of the year. And you know what? When I started to put this list together, there was no doubt to me which book was going to be my book of the year. In all honesty, as soon as I finished this book, I had it earmarked as something I would be talking about at the end of the year. Now this is another book that I've picked up as part of my exploration of the Booker Prize list. I'm talking about Wild Houses by Colin Barrett. Wild Houses is the debut novel from an Irish writer who had previously released some collections of short stories under the names Young Skins and Homelessness. Here Barrett does a masterful job of expanding that talent across a wider space. We find ourselves in small town Ireland. It's set in Ballina, County Mayo. The story centres around the kidnapping of Dol English, a teenager who gets caught up in his brother Killian's mess as he's entangled with local drug enforcers. Those enforcers are the Ferdier brothers, who were using Dol as leverage to try and get back the money that has been lost to Killian. The story takes place over one weekend. We're given a few perspectives. First, you've got Dol as he's kept captive from these awful people. Then you've got his cousin Dev Hendrick. You've also got his hard-working, resilient girlfriend Nikki, who is working to try and get him back. The characters are richly drawn, each grappling with their own personal demons and societal constraints. Whether it's Dev's struggle with acceptance, anxiety and isolation, or Nikki's struggle for a better life, you get a really interesting take about these different people. Now, I listen to this on Audible. Usually that means that it's left for me when I'm in the car, walking the dog, or having a workout at the gym. But this was such an engaging book that I just could not take my AirPods out of my ears until it was finished, so I got through this within a couple of days and I absolutely loved my time. Similar to The Family Upstairs, some people might find the ending to not give them that kind of cathartic close that you'd be expecting, because some things are left untied. This open-endedness reflects the unpredictability of life, and for me, I quite liked the way this book finished. But if you're going to be frustrated by things like that, do take it as a warning. For the last few years, I've been absolutely loving the work from contemporary Irish authors like Claire Keegan, Sally Rooney, and loads more, and it's great to be able to add Colin Barrett to that list. They all seem to have a great way of writing dialogue and making really engaging characters that pull you in all of themselves. You don't need an elaborate narrative running behind a story when you've got these really dense characters that you buy into, you believe in, and you want to know more about. That said, this story does have a great narrative, so bringing those two together makes for a really interesting read. This is a page-turning book that will really grab you if you like gritty realism and believable characters. If you want a really engaging narrative that is going to hold your attention, I think you're going to absolutely love Wild Houses by Colin Barrett. So there you have it. They are the books that I most enjoyed reading last year, and I think there is some awesome options there if you're looking for something new to read yourself. If you've enjoyed this video, a like would be appreciated, and a sub to the channel would be amazing. I'd love to see you next time. Thank you very much. Goodbye.